They were Walt Disney's 9 old men. From Bambi and Thumper to Snow White and Cinderella, they created the characters, the images, and the dreams we all grew up to. Back in the day, everybody knew the phrase 9 old men. 70 years ago, that was what President Franklin Roosevelt called the Supreme Court when he didn't like them, which was almost all the time. But Walt's 9 old men weren't old, and he loved them. Together they invented the American art form, the animated feature. This is the Tam O'Shanter Inn down the hill from Disney's Burbank studios, where Walt would regularly take his 9 old men to lunch. I hope he let them order anything they wanted, because their art and their genius have helped us all live happier ever after. The 9 old men were Les Clark, Eric Larson, Wolfgang Reitherman, Ward Kimball, Milt Kahl, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, John Lounsbury, Mark Davis. To celebrate the astounding achievements of these pioneers in the art of animation, we've gathered together some of today's top talents in the world of animation who knew, worked with, and were mentored by one or more of Disney's 9 old men. This is the table. This is the table where Walt and the 9 old men would have lunch. And when you were a kid, was there a moment in a Disney feature that really affected you? Part one of the question. And part two, how did you feel when you met the person who had created that?
Certainly for me, one of the big things was seeing Sleeping Beauty as a kid. It was released in '59 originally, and fight with the dragon and the prince and the thorns and all that. And that was Wooly Reitherman, one of the 9 old men, who really supervised that. Years later, when I started the studio, Wooly, this sort of craggy, bow-legged, swashbuckler of a guy, seeing this guy who really had sort of created this great work of art, really, it was a little bit of a disconnect. This is the guy who did that whole thing with the dramatic impact.
There was that moment of quiet where the two adversaries were tensing, and you hopefully didn't quite know what was going to happen.
Pinocchio came out around that time, and that it was, in some ways, maybe even a bigger impact. And that was a lot of the 9 old men, Frank and Ollie and all those guys really bringing that to life. And Brad actually knew Milt Kahl from, 13 or something like that?
Yeah. I learned a lot from him, but I kind of had to get it from his sputterings and from his drawings. So, I got to do this scene, and I was very impressed with myself. I had it, and it was moved pretty good. And I showed it to this guy who was in charge of bringing in new talent. And he looked at it and he goes, "Oh, that's pretty good," and then he started chuckling, and I'm like, what's wrong? I'm thinking very highly of myself, and he goes, "Milt's gonna rip the expletive out of this," And so I went in and I'd show it to him, and he'd kind of go, "Geez, you didn't even explore the possibilities here. You could have done this, or you could have done that."
I don't think it's possible to be a top-notch animator without being a very excellent draftsman. You have to be able to draw these characters in order to move them around and articulate them, So there's no way of doing it unless you draw very well.
I'd come out of there like, oh my God, I have so much to learn. And that was actually a really good thing for me.
But Eric Larson was the mentor of many of us at the studio.
Almost everyone went through Eric at some point, because he was kind of the first person that you worked with, even as you were doing personal tests when you began at Disney in the training program. He was the teacher.
I found in the kitten, something that was warm, and the job, of course, was to make him come alive as a personality. So what do? You say, well, how old is he? All right, he's a spunky 4-year-old kid or 3-year-old kid, whatever you want. How will they react in given conditions and in certain situations?
Actually, Cinderella was a film that was kind of very, very pivotal to me, as well as The Reluctant Dragon, which I remember going to a camp, Indian guide camp for a weekend, and there's a great scene where Robert Benchley gets lost in the studio, and it's behind the scenes, and he goes into the animator's room, and there's Ward Kimball. He's finishing up the drawing of Goofy, puts it on this stack of paper, picks it up and flips it, starts whistling, and Goofy starts dancing around. I was just like, the bug took a big bite, the animation bug.
Artist always goes back